Welcome back.
What kind of research are you working on?
I'm reading up on the Remnant. Our lives here in EOS probably depend on it, so keep those scans coming.
Activating that vault changed the planet. Anything to worry about?
Considering it's world-altering technology we've never encountered before, I hope not. But the storms show no signs of returning, and I know who to contact for Remnant tech support. I'll take it.
What do you make of Lieutenant Bradley?
Determined as hell. And he has incredible faith in us to get this done. Bradley would carry this outpost on his back if he had to, and we'll make sure he never has to.
Hello, greater YouTube area and the surrounding internet regions. This is Killer Cardinal DA7. So in case you're not a gamer, what you just saw is a short snippet of conversation from the first outpost in the game Mass Effect Andromeda. Not too long after Andromeda came out earlier this year, the character you saw, Hanley Abrams, made gaming headlines. I put links in the description to provide more details, but to summarize, in the dialogue you have with Hanley when you first meet her at the game's launch, she admits to being transgender really quickly, prompting many to question developer BioWare's ability and the ability of other developers to accurately portray transgender characters in games. Originally, Hanley blurts out her dead name, which is a term used in the transgender community for the name a person is assigned at birth, but one that sometimes gets buried once that person takes on their new name after they transition. The author of the article, Laura Dale, observes Hanley as uncomfortable when dealing with the subject. She claims that it didn't make sense for Hanley to be open so quick, and that it isn't typical for transgender people to act that way. BioWare decided to accommodate this with a patch modifying that conversation, among many other aspects of the game that are unrelated. What I showed at the beginning was just a bit of Hanley speaking from my own playthrough that I believe was unchanged in the patch, but I put a link in the description to a video that shows the news-making part of the original conversation both before the patch and after, so you can compare at your leisure. Another view of this issue comes from Sam Greer, who wrote an article for Eurogamer. Sam claims the original lines of the dialogue Hanley has are flat out bad because, quote, that she's the colony's scientific director, an important role one imagines, is made secondary to her identity as a trans woman. This fact apparently had to be pushed front and center to the extent that it is written as her main reason for being here, unquote. So, Laura feels that the character's perceived discomfort makes it less believable for her to admit her transition so easily, while Sam feels that the representation of the character emphasizes gender over more important matters. I kind of feel both of these viewpoints are slightly off. Let's talk about Sam's account first. So Sam points out that BioWare wrote Hanley's reason for being in this galaxy is to start a new life as a woman after living as a man, and that was too direct. Well, first off, what's wrong with that reason? If Hanley moves, something many transgender people do when transitioning, and she has a specific skill set and wants to go to another galaxy, how is that not art imitating life, outside of the new galaxy part? Second, when a character sounds or feels somewhere in the middle of two gender extremes, viewers get so worked up asking the barrage of are they, aren't they questions, that's all they end up worrying about. And all because writers or developers choose to emphasize those more important aspects of their life or personality or occupation over something as surface as gender or as potentially ancillary as their sexual orientation. Sure, everybody in society deserves to see love interests play out on screen, but can we agree that typically universal and civilizational obliteration tends to supersede relationships maybe once in a while? If love stories have the potential to turn a serious world-destroying environment into a cute romp through the wheat fields, then I could give a fuck if a character is straight, gay, pansexual, or anything else. It's a major problem in entertainment media. Characters can so rarely just do cool shit without fandoms asking all manner of shallow questions to see if a particular character they might love is one they can maybe relate to. I dealt with this a bit in my last video about Doctor Who and Link. Like I said there, ideally we should all be able to relate to characters of different races, genders, sexualities, etc. because of their depth and personalities. But unfortunately, a lot of people are unable to see outside their little boxes. So in response to Sam, she's not entirely wrong, but the reason for the badness of the dialogue is either evidence that it was rushed and uninformed, or an emphasis to head off the accusations of queerbaiting. In other words, per Wikipedia, the practice mainly in film or television writing to hint at, but then to not actually depict, a potential same-sex romantic relationship between fictional characters. So they either make it too front and center or they queerbait. Sam asks late in the article, quote, would it be so outlandish for a close companion to be quietly revealed as trans? They could. I'm not saying they shouldn't. I'd be fine with that. Even providing the ability to create a transgender character, especially in a BioWare game, which is all about you playing a role. Sam also asks about that. I'd be fine with that too. But if they quietly reveal the companion or other non-playable character as transgender, what if various sub-fandoms kick up over this companion and they're not given enough spotlight? If it's not front and center enough, it can be seen as queerbaiting, so ultimately, BioWare is on the chopping block either way. From a purely writing standpoint, I will agree with the sentiment that the original introduction Hanley gives wasn't well written or strong at all. It didn't capture that show don't tell most good writers encourage. Hanley may as well have just said, "Nice to meet you, Pathfinder, transgender staff member at your service," which, despite my lacking experience in face-to-face interactions along my life, even I know that's pretty canned. So yeah, while some people see BioWare changing those lines as pandering to social justice warriors, the change did make the character better, so I'm inclined to agree with it just on that. In regard to Laura's take, in the original dialogue, Laura seems to think that Hanley is showing enough discomfort to suggest that she wouldn't want her dead name known, but I really didn't see it that way. I started playing the game after the patch that changed the conversation, but when the story broke months ago, I watched both versions to compare, and honestly, Hanley to me seemed like an optimistic and honest character. She's asked by the main character, "What brought you to Andromeda?" She points out a dead-end job and being known as Stefan. She wanted to change and went to a new galaxy to get it. Like I said, I will agree that the original dialogue was weak, if for no other reason than her backstory was a little too easy, too simply put together, and could have been more complex to be at the level Mass Effect tends to present to players. But had she spent 5 to 10 minutes lamenting abuse she'd suffered while just introducing herself, it would have made her look like a total lunatic. She was asked a simple, small-talk question, gave a simple, upfront answer with rather surface details about how she got there. Is there deeper discomfort or upset? Maybe you have to get to know her better to find out. But see, even hundreds of years in the future, in a completely different galaxy, we apparently need to depict transgender people as these emotional wrecks that all have these dark pasts they're terrified to handle. Pasts full of abuse, mockery, shame, depression, suicidal tendencies, psychological damage. Why do those things need to come with the transgender package to be, quote, accurate? Laura Dale says in her article, quote, "Having their dead name brought up isn't a problem for some trans people." She admits it's not a problem for everyone, and if we're really getting surgical, having her dead name brought up, that would suggest that someone else is bringing it up. As Laura says of herself in the article, Laura is afraid of others knowing her dead name because if they don't know it, they can't use it as a weapon against her. That's completely fair. I can respect that. I don't plan on looking it up, but if I ever meet Laura someday, this is handy. I'll know to not ask. But Hanley comes out and admits it herself. She's taking control of that hardship, which in and of itself is a form of coping mechanism. Being open with something she used to feel self-conscious about. In fact, I'll take that one step further. She's choosing to make herself vulnerable and admit something simple that can supposedly be used against her. Personally, I consider that admirable. It's the kind of openness and honesty that I love in people. It's the kind that gets me to open up more to them. Look, in an ideal situation, people should be able to admit just about anything to another individual without any judgment. Which isn't to say that judgment in general should be squashed or punished. There's always going to be judgmental people in the world or galaxy or universe. That shit is inevitable. But interactions where people can be honest about who they are and what they've done still accommodate people being accepted as they want to be after transitioning. Not everyone who knows you transition will throw it back in your face or think you're a liar. It just means people know how you got to that point. It's the responsibility of others to be respectful. It shouldn't be assumed that important parts of your life need to be erased in order to, quote, be who you are. I'm not saying transgender people always need to tell every single person they meet of that fact, especially people you don't plan on knowing very intimately. I'm just saying for Hanley in particular to admit that initially, especially when it connects to the question asked of her, I don't think it makes quite as little sense as Laura is implying. Let me get more to the point and kind of step away from Mass Effect because that's just one example. There's a question that is constantly on my mind when thinking about transgender people that I want to share. And keep in mind, I ask this question without implication or judgment. It's just something I'd like to know to better understand the mindset. What exact aspects of being either male or female present a problem for some people? And I ask that not necessarily directed at just transgender people, but at everyone. What aspects of those things present a problem? It's 2017. There are men out there who identify as men, who happen to have long hair, high-pitched voices, graceful movements, smooth skin, who wear nail polish, eyeliner, jewelry, dresses, and/or pantsuits. And there are women out there who identify as women with short hair, deep voices, no makeup, body and yes, sometimes facial hair, who wear torn flannel vests and boots and drive pickup trucks. So what? Identifying as one gender or another, especially in 2017 and beyond, doesn't restrict you from wearing what you want, looking how you want, sounding how you want. There are professional ways to dress and casual ways to dress. Professional ways to dress tend to be more gender specific at times, but I'd be willing to bet that line is blurring slowly but surely. Casual dress, that's already pretty blurry. Personally, I spend the vast majority of my own time in black t-shirts, jeans, and Doc Marten boots. I might be going a little far with my descriptions a moment ago. That's some extreme cases, but nothing I wear is in any way gender specific. So if it isn't restrictions on appearance, is it the label itself that causes the problem? Do certain people have trouble with what male and female represent as labels? Maybe the attitudes or demeanors of typical males or females don't gel with you? Again, I'm asking all of this objectively. No implications. This isn't rhetorical. I'm not expecting specific answers. I want to support transgender people in getting more recognition and acceptance, but I want to do it in a way that refuses to be afraid to ask frank questions, especially when there are people out there who want to know the same things, but are either too afraid to ask or too set in their ways to bother questioning in the first place. Let me rephrase my question slightly. What is it about being male or being female that causes a person to say, that's not me? I want to take a moment here to turn that question on myself. I hate the idea of speaking about society like I'm not a part of it. And since this isn't a live back and forth discussion with another person, I'm the only one to ask, so here I go. I'll admit I probably wouldn't appreciate if someone started calling me female, she, her, etc., because it's not true. That's not to say I look down on women or I would be ashamed to be a woman. It's just not what I am. It's not even that I think there's a ton of things that define being male or being female. Most of it is pretty surface, though the biological aspects do make some difference. Males typically have more hair and muscle mass, females typically have less of both, but according to many studies and reports, they use more of their brains, which isn't to say women are naturally smarter than men. Smarts tends to be more tied to how much you or I study or observe. I guess females just have more going on upstairs, which can be both a blessing and a curse. But genetics and hormones can vary person to person. There are some tiny little men and some huge bulked up women, so physicality is kind of a moot point. There is also some microscopic sliver of truth in modern times to the hunter-gatherer imperatives we naturally have deep in the backgrounds of our brains, even if many of us deprogram ourselves from those instincts largely due to how American society works. If some American families still find themselves in situations where the man goes to work all day and the woman stays home doing housework with the kids, tradition grew from some degree of natural biological ways of living, but like I said, we've kind of evolved out of all that. Plenty of stay-at-home dads raising kids while working women go out in the workforce and bring home the bacon. So again, that might be another dead end. I think there's some definite weight to calling someone who can or could produce sperm male and someone who can or could produce eggs female. I do respect people's decisions to transition, that's all fine and good, but so far I haven't heard of people fully transitioning and either impregnating a woman or getting pregnant as their new genders. Never say never, I'm probably wrong about that. Usually sperm is created in testicles and comes out of a penis. Eggs are made in the ovaries, pass through the fallopian tubes into the uterus for potential fertilization. We all know how this shit works. Then again, just because you have a penis doesn't mean you can bring about a pregnancy, and just because you have a vagina doesn't mean you can get pregnant. So while those two aspects seem to be the most gender-specific things imaginable, maybe those male and female labels are seen as insensitive to sterile people who can't do those things. Are you really not a male just because you can't impregnate a woman? Are you really not a female just because you can't get pregnant? That seems to cut out a shit ton of people. And then what about celibate people? The chances pregnancy is a major factor in their lives is slim to none. So if fertility is really the determining factor for them, it's kind of irrelevant, unless they go in vitro, I guess. And how about intersex individuals who were born with multiple sexes genitalia? Do they just not get a label because it's freaking hard to figure out? All that being said, quite frankly, I feel as if my own gender is the one thing that says the very least about me, which is probably why I'm so fascinated by thinking about the struggles people endure when dealing with gender issues. I really wish I knew why it's so much more complicated for others, why being assigned a particular gender at birth feels like such a curse for some people, when in this day and age, there are folks out there fighting with all they've got to remove any type of restrictions your gender might have. I absolutely despise some of the ways militant feminists view men, and the way I act and talk and the things I believe attempt to counter those things as civilly as possible. But that doesn't mean I dislike being a man. I don't know, I'm just me. There's stuff I prioritize and care about in regard to my identity, and there are things I don't care about as much. It's more important a person talking about me gets me right and understands what I'm saying and where I'm coming from than being something specific. Does that make any sense? Could it be a control thing? Like I said, the idea of being assigned something at birth. Let's look at that wording. Assign. Someone assigns you a gender when you're born, assigns you a name, and a transgender person goes through gender reassignment themselves. Those first couple things do sound passive, like they're out of your hands. I've got to say here, if it helps any, one thing that I've actually kind of giggled at when comparing all of us as humans is that no matter how tough, badass, strong, murderous, and or bloodthirsty some people are, all of us start as babies. All of us. Every single one. Whether you or I gestated after fertilization in a womb or in a test tube, we all grew to infancy. We were these little tiny beings incapable of being mobile until we learned to crawl or walk, incapable of complex communication. We had no knowledge of society, relationships, jobs, money, clothing, shelter, sickness, biology. We could barely feed ourselves. Even if we could manage somehow to pull ourselves along the ground to a puddle to quench our thirsts, and eat bugs for nourishment, which we wouldn't even know to do on our own, chances aren't good at all we'd live past a month or two after being born if left without any care or parents or guardians or doctors or anything. All of us went through a period where we were completely helpless, dependent on one or more other people, and much of our upbringing was out of our control. It's not like there's some hardcore son of a gun out there, didn't have parents, didn't have doctors, didn't have an orphanage. They just made it out in the woods and survived and learned to speak and grew past their teens and lived off the land alone. No, that's not one single person on this planet. There are things in the world, in life, that are out of our control. Plenty of things. So someone assigning you something as innocuous as a sex or a gender, knowing that when you grow up, you're free to make whatever the fuck you want out of that sex or gender, to me it seems pretty low on the list of things to worry about compared to someone feeding you, raising you, clothing you, curing you when you're sick, etc., whoever those people might be. We can bash the medical community for assigning us sexes or genders because you see them trying to control you or make some decision for you, but I just feel like it means so little in the grand scheme of who you are. Now, if we're going to talk about who you are, who I am, whatever, let's deal with a slightly different elephant in a slightly different room. There is this idea out there that being transgender is a psychological disorder. Maybe some kind of body dysmorphia, like a skinny person looks in the mirror, sees a fat person, we look at them, we see a skinny person. Same thing here, a boy looks at himself, doesn't see what we see, thinks he's a girl, etc. I'll say this right now, I don't believe being transgender is a disorder. With anorexia or related problems, if you deprive yourself of enough nutrition, you'll fucking die. So even if the aspect of I don't see me the way you see me is kind of similar, there's much more at stake. However, even if I wouldn't label being transgender as a disorder, you have to admit, when a person sees an official form, like for identification or health insurance or whatever, and they see maybe the third question, gender, male or female, and that gives that person an anxiety attack, can we agree something might be a bit off? Maybe not wrong, but just off? Especially since, like I said a moment ago, if there's barely anything restricting people from being who they want, changing their name, their mode of dress, whatever, what significance does that label even hold? I mean, if someone asks you to describe yourself, where does your gender even lie in terms of priority? If it's high on the list, like it's the first thing you mentioned, does that mean certain things need to follow? If you're a person who checks the box that says male, it's fine if you like cars, football, and guns, but if you prefer art galleries and poetry, you're still fucking male. If you check the box that says female, you can appreciate, I don't know, high fashion diamonds, but if you prefer motorcycles and hunting instead, you're still a woman. That's not me lending you permission, you have my blessing, do whatever you want. I want people to recognize me as a male because that's what I am, but if I were a female, to be perfectly fucking honest, I wouldn't be much different. I'd still love video games and heavy metal and pro wrestling when pro wrestling decides to not suck. Just like how I dress, those things aren't gender specific. Plenty of women like one or more of those things too. Plenty of women like bloody action movies for reasons other than Jason Statham. And plenty of men like Broadway musicals and getting their eyebrows threaded. So if what I like and how I dress and what my body is shaped like don't define my gender, then what the hell does gender even mean at this point? I believe for a long while that genetic, biological sex, and outward gender are two separate things. For some people, yeah, those two things are vastly different. One person's born a male, they couldn't possibly act more feminine, and vice versa obviously exists. For others, they go hand in hand. One person's born a male, maybe a fair chance they end up at the car show pumping iron at the gym. Another's born a female, and they like playing house and acting like a princess. You can argue that's a result of society forcing us to bring up our children in certain ways, though truthfully, I think people sometimes hold this fear a little too close. The fear that society is pressuring people to be certain ways. And when a small child, for example, kisses another child of the same gender, their parents and community crowd around and scream the kid is gay. Well, okay, they could be. Maybe they're just experimenting. Plenty of kids kiss other kids of the opposite sex and they grow to hate it. Others do it, they stick with it. Whatever, it's all options. We should all experiment and try new things. Sure, sometimes society can overemphasize certain ways of life in media or in the public and make them look normal, but raising voices and holding parades to balance all that out is basically the same thing. It isn't always a way to let children decide for themselves. That can also constitute pressure. It doesn't avoid being pressure because it's not heteronormative. Letting young people grow how they want means keeping watch over them to ensure they're not making massively bad decisions, but pretty much leaving them alone. There are some really progressive parents who would just love to have a transgender or homosexual kid, and that's fine and cool, but if their kid wants to be cisgender and or heterosexual, that's also allowed. Just like a kid who grows up in a staunchly religious household, if they want to be gay, this is America, they can be gay. Look at social media for any length of time these days, and you'll see thousands, if not millions of people wearing mental illness as a badge of honor. Now, as much as I do think there are some people who occasionally exaggerate simple quirks or personality traits to gain entrance and protection in the mentally ill community, despite that, I do understand that mental illnesses are real and deserve respect, and when possible, we should try to accommodate our friends and loved ones at least on some of those mental illnesses. Do not misunderstand this, however. To reiterate, I don't think being transgender is a mental illness or a psychological disorder. I respect people with mental illnesses, but if you were to call being transgender a mental illness, it would suggest that it's something that needs to be fought or cured or defeated. Even some people who turn their own mental illnesses into a sign of pride or uniqueness would acknowledge to a degree that some of those things require fight and determination to overcome, or at least push back. I don't think being transgender needs to be defeated or fought or necessarily pushed back. However, even if it were officially deemed a type of mental illness by every doctor and psychologist on the planet, there are people with OCD, clinical depression, social anxiety, I probably got a chuckle at that one myself, and a slew of other things who manage to mingle and blend society seamlessly. Thus, being transgender doesn't equate to a person being unstable or psychotic to a point where they can't lead regular, ordinary, everyday lives. They can hold the same positions as cisgender people. It's not a mark that guarantees a person is off their rocker, yet there are people who call it a mental illness as if it is, as if wearing different clothing or having a different body shape is a smoking gun that they're going to flip out on the job. If a person shows too much emotion, too little caution, or they repeatedly damage a company or its well-being, yeah, they aren't suited to be in charge, regardless of their gender. The government didn't make a mistake letting Kristen Beck serve for 20 years in Bosnia, Iraq, and Afghanistan and be part of Navy SEAL Teams 1, 5, and 6 just because he came out as a trans woman in 2013 and became Kristen. They made a good decision, and Beck was a loyal part of our military, defending our freedoms and the freedoms of others when she was Christopher. I'm no doctor or geneticist, and I'm certainly no expert in society matters, but that seems to be a huge part of this problem. Not everyone interprets their own gender and the genders of others the same exact way. Everybody's got their own interpretation, and even among the transgender community itself, there are different viewpoints, different types of people that all want accurate representation, and figuring out the best way to explain or describe everything is proving really difficult, even for people who live that every single day. Look at Caitlyn Jenner. When people call Caitlyn by the name Bruce, at least in the present tense, like Bruce was on the cover of Vanity Fair, that's widely seen as disrespectful. And I can see where that's coming from. He isn't Bruce, she is Caitlyn. Okay, that's easy for most of us to understand. Grammatically, though, that seems to imply Bruce and Caitlyn are two separate people. You call her Bruce, she may not respond because that's not her name. Then again, the winner of Olympic gold medal in the decathlon in 1976, that was Bruce Jenner. Caitlyn Jenner didn't do that, but that just continues to complicate things because they're physically the same human being. That human being has been two different people, which is very, very uncommon for most people in society and across the world. Especially if a person's transition is being rather muted or ignored or pushed away. I mean, that's where the whole dead name thing comes in. That former person is gone, buried, not present anymore. They're kind of dead. You can view calling Caitlyn Bruce as disrespectful because she's not that person. Fine, I can agree with that. But then in the next breath, say she won a gold medal because they're exactly the same person, like I did earlier with Kristen and Christopher. That degree of contradiction is partly why it's so tough for some cisgender people to grasp. Those inconsistencies, that willingness to accept people rewriting their own personal history because of feelings and impulses and changes that occur. Some concession needs to be made about this. Some of these hard lines need to be pulled back to be fair to historical truth. I'll never meet Caitlyn in my life, but I do accept Caitlyn is a woman. Historically, though, Bruce won that gold medal. Fast forward, Bruce became Caitlyn. I accept that perfectly fine as a compromise, but gosh, the amount of syntax surgery going on here is just immense. You can argue, but Bruce was Caitlyn her whole life, she just didn't know it. Or society didn't let her be who she really was. Perhaps. Some small children who experiment with different clothing tend to be railroaded into the transgender tunnel because they're just being who they are, maybe. Then again, there are 70, 80, 90, 100 plus year old people who have no idea who they are, and I'm not even talking about the senile ones, I'm talking about the completely conscious, lucid ones who still suck up knowledge like a vacuum and exercise twice a day, that even in that amount of time haven't fully grasped who they are or who they really want to be. I'll grant you, age isn't a determinant of wisdom. In my life, I've known people who were years older than me that I never really got the impression that they learned anything from their hardships, victories, sadness. Like they keep letting themselves fall into the same traps, so they overcompensate and build up walls that are far too high and get too overprotective of themselves. However, tiny little toddlers with literally no frame of reference for anything to do with life whatsoever, they suddenly know exactly who they are deep inside their souls and spirits. Why? Because they act on impulse and they aren't cringing in the corner because society? They barely know what society and gender are. They don't know if they should or shouldn't wear high heels or have a crew cut. If a little boy wants to try on mommy's makeup, or if a little girl wants to tie daddy's tie around her neck, safely mind you, she watched a YouTube video, she knows how to tie a Windsor knot, don't fuck with her. That doesn't mean they're transgender. It doesn't mean they're not transgender either. How about just giving them some room and time to see more of the world and society and make those decisions for themselves? If they stick to it into adulthood, fine. If they grow out of it, just as fine. For some kids, it'll be a way of life. For others, it'll be a phase. There's barely anything you can guarantee about your experience when you raise a kid. You can hope, pray, cross your fingers. No way of telling that kid will be anything you want them to be. In fact, most times when you want a kid to be something, that's usually the definite mark they'll do the exact opposite. People want to believe they were born a certain way, and that's usually used to counter people with a kind of stone wall. I was born this way. Well, in other words, there's no changing. You're never going to change. You're only going to be one thing and one thing alone because you were born a particular way. Let me tell you a little bit more about me. For all the time people spend talking about science as hard evidence and proof, there's very little scientific evidence, at least as far as I've seen, to prove astrology to be fact. Yet I've always been a very balanced person, long before I knew what Libra stood for as a zodiac sign. A friend showed me a horoscope website a long time ago. I read about it and I was like, yep, that's me in a nutshell. I've been this way as long as I can remember, much in the same way many members of the LGBT community feel about their own identities. And while I don't spend every minute of my day battling Scorpios or Aries the way LGBT folks battle with religious conservatives, the point I'm making here is that I do spend a lot of time battling with myself. Having a strong sense of balance is a great thing when I use it to see different sides of an argument, as I'm trying to do here, but it sucks when making decisions. I'm constantly on the fence about so many things, and even when I do make decisions, I'm looking to the other side and doubting the choice I made. It happens every single day of my life. That's an aspect I was born with. Not biology nor science have a single explanation for why I am that way, and yet it's still something I wrestle with. Being born with something, as something, it doesn't mean your feelings and impulses are law and you should just mindlessly obey. We owe it to ourselves to fight ourselves when our own natures or instincts give us pause. I don't have to apologize for being balanced and indecisive, though I tend to because I know people who have problems dealing with it from time to time. I understand being who I am doesn't always mesh with the ways of others, and I try to not be that arrogant to think that everyone needs to accept me as I am, because the way I am will not ever work for everyone. If I know a person is transgender or non-binary, I'll call them by whatever name or pronouns they want, as long as I know what those are. All I would ask is that if I happen to forget or get it wrong, just let me know, nicely if possible, and give me a few do-overs and a chance to apologize. Other than that, I'll gladly acknowledge you in whatever way you feel most comfortable, regardless of whether I know you've transitioned or not. If you want to tell me, and you want me to keep that information to myself, you can count on me. I would just hope you feel comfortable enough to share that with others, though, if they don't already know, as a lot of times these days, even if you don't know a person closely, it's becoming more and more obvious that a transition was made. Caitlyn Jenner, Kristen Beck, Laura Dale, Chaz Bono, game designer now running for Congress Brianna Wu. It's not hard to identify their transitions just by looking and listening, even if a person didn't know who they were. And this doesn't mean any of these people deserve harassment just because it's easy to notice. It just means someone might want to ask. Making that big a change is modifying your entire body chemistry. People will want to ask. Of course, those are also public figures. Most, if not all those I just mentioned, had some time and some degree of public eye before transitioning, so they have the benefit. I know that's a weird word to use given how much punishment they typically take. They have some small benefit of being known before and after. Their transitions were usually news. Televised, internet, whatever. Maybe not as much for Laura or Brianna. I don't know how long they've been in the game industry scene. Maybe they've transitioned before becoming popular or gaining followings. I don't know that much about them, I'll be honest. But certainly Caitlyn, Chaz, and Kristen, they were known. Their transitions made news. And for them, they couldn't hide it. It was either deal with people knowing you transitioned or become a hermit and be afraid forever. For average people who don't have any spotlight, they can attempt to transition seamlessly. Sometimes they succeed. They usually move somewhere people don't know them so they can start over. Even then, the transition might not be thorough enough to blend in, and people might ask questions or be tempted to ask. The fear might set in that people around you may cause trouble or say nasty things, and if they do, the temptation to fight back and stoop to their level might creep its way in. I've never gone through as massive a change like that myself, outside of moving houses with my family when I was young, but I know that for transgender people, it's not just the physical strain that makes transitioning tough. It's also how everyone around you deals with it and whether they'll be accepting or not. Maybe in time, being transgender will be so common no one will say anything. I mean, I look back and remember a time when being gay was radical. Nowadays, being gay is probably one of the most normal things you can be in America. Maybe not number one, but you have to admit high up there on the list for sure. The same will absolutely happen with gender. I'll be really honest here, and I don't want you to interpret this as a judgment, but if I knew a person very closely and they told me they wanted to transition, in other words, go through all the surgeries, the vocal cord modification, hormone replacement, all the physical stuff, the whole 9 yards, I'd probably try to talk them out of it. Not too hard. I mean, if they were completely gung-ho, no going back, I would still support and love them 100%. I wouldn't cut them out of my life for anything, but surgery is surgery, you know? There's just no telling how those procedures will come out. Even done by pros, there could be any number of complications, or a person's body might reject it, or maybe everything goes perfect, but the changes aren't satisfactory to a person's specifications before they start the process, or all the cutting and reshaping and restructuring of body chemistry may not feel the way a person really wanted them to. If there's a way to try it out first somehow before really committing, I'd suggest that, but I know it's hard to fully envision yourself in a different body or state unless you fully take the plunge. Just definitely give it thought before you do. In a way, when I think of the process of gender reassignment, I sometimes compare it to the surge of visibility and acceptance among communities of plus-size women. I mean, if things like outward appearance, clothing, accessories, activity preferences, etc. are mostly non-gender specific these days, what could it come down to besides body shape? Well, Here is a group of people attempting to love their bodies exactly as they are, refusing to feel pressured by society to be a certain way before they get to feel good. Granted, many plus-size women do maintain particular weights by eating healthier, as opposed to throwing caution to the wind at every meal, as many people think they do, and as I've seen is often not the case. The underlying sentiment is that many plus-size women don't want to feel bad about themselves simply because of a body shape, which a significant portion of the time isn't as easy to drastically change as just don't eat or work out more. Plus-size women are attempting to be proud of their shapes, regardless of pressure or harassment or feigned concern for their health, either mental or physical. Some go through weight loss surgeries, yeah, and some who do remain, quote, fat in the eyes of some people in society, but ultimately that body positivity movement is there to encourage people to appreciate their size and or shape, especially in some cases where there isn't as much they can do to change it, or it isn't as easy as it is for others. Similarly, if a person is confused about their gender identity, or they can't decide what gender they want to be, if they were to grow happier with their natural body shape, isn't that a step in the right direction? That they can live happily without feeling convinced that surgery is the only hope for them to be happy? I'm not saying people shouldn't have it as an option. I live in America. There are plenty of surgeries people get on a daily basis that I wouldn't recommend, but that I wouldn't stop people from getting. Like, ladies, if you feel you need a boob job, go ahead. I'd recommend trying to appreciate what you've got first, but if that's not an option, if you've already tried that and you want surgery, I wish you the best of luck. No complications or issues, and as little pain as possible during recovery. I'm just saying, not having to put one's body through major changes like that, if a person can help it, seems like the better way to go. You can have a ton of surgeries. You still might not be happy. And if you aren't, it's just as many surgeries and even more money, pain, and strain to get back to square one. If you can find a good support system, learn to love yourself at square one, and progress from there, you're much more bound to be comfortable than if you got surgery, which is risky for so many reasons. I'm not trying to make it sound easy. I know it's absolutely not. There are just as many 100-plus-year-old people who hate themselves as there are 100-plus-year-old people proud of making it that far. No guarantee any of us will be happy when we die, but that's probably better dealt with in another video completely. Look, here's the bottom line for all this. I just want people to appreciate who they are without thinking drastic measures are the answer. But if some drastic measures are necessary and they seem to fix the problem, more power to you. Let's still be friends. I want people to have more confidence and keep on moving through their lives. We only have so long here on Earth before we move on to the next step. We all have choices to make. We all have our own personal journeys. And a lot of times, no amount of questions, invasive or softball, will change those courses. People are hard-headed, they're less apologetic, less tolerant, less willing to put up with other people's nonsense. Truthfully, you have to shake some of it off, but some of it might be worth listening to. Like I said, if you're transgender, regardless of what stage or type or designation, I can still be cool with you and love you as a human being. No worries, let's play some games and move on. Hopefully you listened to everything I had to say here and have some thoughts you'd like to share. Doesn't matter what sector of society or side you're on, please feel free to sound off in the comments. Give me your thoughts. I don't know, maybe we can come to some kind of agreement on all this. This is Killer Cardinal DA7 reminding you to use your head, be nice to each other, and take the time to think. Talk to you later.
I've got to go.
Keep up the good work.